The food industry is facing a new source of uncertainty, and it isn't coming from weather, trade policy, or commodity markets. The rapid adoption of GLP-1 weight loss drugs is raising questions about how consumers eat, what products they buy, and whether demand for everything from snacks to sugary beverages could change over time. Investors are increasingly trying to understand whether this is a short-term concern or a structural shift for the food sector. I'm Johanna Botta, and joining us now to break it all down for us is Ben Klieve, Senior Equity Research Analyst at Benchmark. Ben, it's great to see you again. This is such an interesting topic for me. GLP-1 drugs have become one of the biggest topics in consumer health. I think roughly 1 in 8 Americans are now taking these medications. How seriously is the food industry taking this trend, and has it become a meaningful factor in demand forecasting?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Johanna. And the industry is taking it very seriously. I mean, this is even I would argue even beyond affordability, the kind of health and wellness trends that are really in large part driven by GLP-1 adoption are the biggest kind of change in the food system here over the past 5 years or so. So no doubt the industry is taking it very seriously, and that spans everything from the CPG company to for demand forecasting, like you noted, but also product innovation, et cetera. So it is absolutely something the entire industry is taking very, very seriously.
Okay, so then give me some evidence. Like, what evidence are we seeing so far that these drugs are actually changing consumer purchasing behavior?
So it's interesting because the not only are the users of the drugs, you noted 1 in 8 or so, something in that order of consumers are GLP-1 users, but they are driving the household purchasing decisions. So if you are if you are a spouse to somebody on GLP-1, you're probably going to be eating the same thing they are.
Yeah.
And so it really has kind of transformed household purchase decisions. And that goes from not only what they're eating, but when they're eating, how much they're eating. The retailers are changing product placement around this. The CPG companies are changing packaging, portion sizes, ingredients. I mean, every single aspect of the food chain is being changed by this. And there are certain categories that are explicitly being redefined by this, both in good ways and bad ways. It really is a really universal impact here on the food space.
I mean, you just said something about portion control, which I think would probably be the biggest one with these drugs, right? But let's get into the categories. Which categories actually appear most vulnerable if adoption continues to grow? Like, are we talking about salty snacks, sugary drinks, fast food? Which ones?
Yeah, I mean, you're doing my job for me. That's it. It's the empty calorie type
Yeah.
categories that you just described. I mean, those are the ones that are the most susceptible. There's so chips, your baked goods, et cetera. Absolutely, those are the ones that are the most susceptible.
Okay, and on the flip side, are there any segments that could benefit from this trend?
Yeah, there's many that can, and some in obvious ways, and some in more surprising ways. So, I mean, if you think about a GLP-1 user, the most obvious thing that they need is more protein, smaller portion sizes. So, your animal proteins, your dairy, your functional foods. So, probiotic rich foods like kefir and other fermented offerings. Whole grains that are fiber rich, nutrient dense. Those are the kind of categories that benefit the most. Smaller portion sizes too, a big deal. So snacking within those categories. Beverages also a major trend in this category. Uh, some surprising ones too, though. So like so GLP-1 users have more sensitive palates. They
Mm-hmm.
can't handle more forceful flavors, so they need
Oh,
kind of
I didn't know
milder
that. Okay.
flavors. Yeah, it's called Ozempic tongue. It's a pretty interesting dynamic, and so milder flavors that are more kind of sensitive to the stomach. So like soup. I never would have thought that soup is something that GLP-1 users seek out, but they do. So really everything from the nutritional characteristics to the taste profiles to the sizes. If you are in that trend, you are certainly faring well right now.
Okay, so no spicy Cheetos for them then.
That's correct.
How how are major food manufacturers responding to this? Are companies already adjusting, like you said, product portfolios or innovation pipelines? We talked about product placement. What are they doing?
Yeah, well, so if your question is what are the major food companies doing, most of the majors are very defensive right now because all of the not that's overstating, and not all, but many of the center of the store categories are really at risk right now. So the major food companies that have really kind of defined the center of the store for for the past decades, they are facing pressure from insurgent brands that are kind of reinventing the categories to better reflect health and wellness trends, including GLP-1. So the legacy brands that are out there are really trying to defend their turf. The insurgent brands that there's examples of this throughout the store, but like think about like the pasta category, mac and cheese.
Yeah.
If there are innovations in that category where there are brands that are much more protein forward, much more fiber rich, very nutrient dense, that increasingly have a taste profile that can compete with the legacy brands.
Hmm.
Those are the ones that are getting greater velocity, and they are the ones that are really faring quite well. And again, you see that throughout the store, everything from the prepared food section to baked goods, to cereals, to pasta mix, everything. It's the brands that are really innovating to disrupt legacy categories are really the ones that are faring quite well.
That's really interesting because you keep bringing up protein. And I remember doing an interview earlier in the year with somebody in the dairy market and them saying that whey
Yeah.
protein was actually doing really well because so many companies are starting to put whey protein into all their products. You're basically injecting things with whey protein so that it could say 10 grams of protein, 15 grams of protein on the packaging, which I'm sure is something that is happening right now. And you're right, investors did initially react quite aggressively to this theme. Do you think that markets have overestimated the impact, or is there still some downside risks for some food companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think these trends are quite durable. So, I mean, I think the the downside risk on those kind of legacy players that we talked about, I think that is persistent. I also think the upside potential for a lot of the insurgent brands is also persistent. So, I maybe there's acute examples of markets overreacting one way or the other, but I think by and large the market has really gotten this right, where this is something that is really kind of redefining the value proposition for food companies, both to the positive and the negative side. So yeah, I don't think the market has overestimated this one yet.
Do you think that it's also affecting restaurants? I mean, I'm curious to know because if it's affecting purchasing power in the supermarket, I'm guessing that people are also eating less when they go out.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a muddled dynamic here because affordability with food away from home is a real issue right now. So I think certainly restaurants are leaning into protein, really trying to capture the consumer here, but they also are challenged from a affordability perspective now in a way that they weren't necessarily a couple of years ago. So yeah, restaurants and the food service industry as a whole certainly is trying to lean into this with protein forward options. They also have real affordability issues in the current era.
Okay, and from an agribusiness perspective, could the shift in food consumption eventually affect demand farther up the supply chain, including agricultural commodities?
Yeah, I mean, you noted one of the most interesting ones right now, which is whey protein, which is whey. So I mean, dairy demand is actually improving for the first time in like 60 years. I think the broad agribusiness chain. I think what this really does is cement the fact that animal proteins are not going anywhere.
Hmm.
So animal proteins and then all the grains that support the animal agriculture industry. Those are I think really kind of cemented in. There's several years of pressure in that space. I think that's over and done with. I also think you noted whey protein being injected into everything. There's other proteins that's a great word for it, by the way.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's just what I imagine when I think of all the packaging that's out there with protein that I'm like, there's no natural protein in this.
Yep, yep. No, that's exactly right. And I mean, protein is getting added to things that yeah, like you said, you wouldn't necessarily think, but plenty of choices where it's quite natural to do so. And that protein is whey oftentimes, but also other grains. So I think one of the ways that the ag system is starting to kind of see an opportunity here is for non-traditional plant-based protein. So away from pea, away from corn, from soy. to kind of other specialty grains, those proteins are really increasingly sought after by CPG companies as a way to differentiate and get away from some of the some of those legacy options, which are viewed, not necessarily correctly, but viewed negatively by the consumers. So yeah, absolutely, the ag industry is really, I think kind of redefining what protein is from a plant-based protein perspective, and then really the pressures on animal agriculture are at this point beyond.
Ben, before we let you go, what's the one metric or data point you'll be watching most closely over the next year to determine whether this is becoming a lasting shift in food demand?
So I'll give you two. So one that we're looking at is the evolution of GLP-1s from purely an injectable option to something that can be taken orally. That's something that, you alluded to 1 in 8 consumers being on the drug. That's something that the industry thinks, could really kind of transform the accessibility of this. So
Yeah.
instead of 1 in 8 to 1 in 4. So the impact of pill forms of GLP-1 is absolutely a data point we're looking at. And then kind of an obscure one that I think is really interesting is liquid milk consumption. So that's something that has been
Hmm.
on the downturn for like 50, 60 years. And there's indications that is actually going up on a per capita basis here in the US, at least, over the last couple of years. If GLP-1s can reverse a 60-year trend of liquid milk consumption, that's absolutely, I think, an indicator of how powerful these drugs are in the food system.
Wow, that's so interesting. Ben, thank you so much for your time and obviously for all that insight. And thank you to our viewers for watching. For more financial content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.